As you can appreciate, it's a miserable winter's day here in Ireland. Not exactly ideal for a cliff walk, but to start the incredible story of the Bantry Bay Disaster, I had to bring you out to the south coast of Ireland because it was on a bleak winter's day like this in December 1796 that a French invasion fleet would appear off the Irish coast with a battle-hardened army of French veterans from the revolution in France who had come to Ireland to spark a revolution here. Now, this invasion fleet was one of the greatest what-if moments in Irish history. It was the greatest threat to British rule in centuries, and the story that followed the arrival of this invasion fleet is incredible. So I want you to join me, Fin Dwyer. I'm going to venture down the coast, find a little bit more protection from the elements, bring you back to the 1790s and start this incredible story of the Bantry Bay Disaster, one of the greatest what-if moments in Irish history. So I've travelled a couple of kilometres up the coast to the town of Dunmore East, where I've got a little bit more protection from the wind and rain than I did earlier on. But let's start the story by going back to the 1790s, a truly remarkable decade in Irish history. So in the 1790s, a really radical movement emerged in Ireland. They were inspired by the American Revolution and then the French Revolution. They had done away with their king, Louis XVI, and in Ireland this radical movement wanted to establish increasingly an independent Irish republic. Now initially this movement, the Society of United Irishmen, had been completely legal and open, but in 1794 they had been caught conspiring with revolutionaries in France to try and overthrow British rule in Ireland. Britain at this point was at war with revolutionary France, so this was considered to be treason by the British government that also ruled Ireland at the time. Now this would lead to several revolutionaries being exiled, including Wolfe Tone, a man considered to be the founding father of Irish republicanism, and he had to leave Ireland in 1795. He promised the British government he would go to America and basically leave Irish politics forever. Now he didn't do that, but instead Wolfe Tone actually went to America first, but then travelled on to Paris, where he started to lobby the revolutionary French government to invade Ireland, where he promised the revolutionary movement back in Ireland would rise up and support this French invasion. Now at the time, two key French leaders, a man called Lazare Carnot and Lazare Hoche, were really supportive of this idea, and by December 1796 a massive invasion fleet of French revolutionaries. Now these are battle hardened, they've got a huge amount of military experience from fighting in the revolution in France and the wars that followed it, and they're all concentrated in the port of Brest in December 1796. But maybe now we'll go down to the port here in Dunmore East and we'll talk about what happened when that massive French invasion fleet set sail for Ireland in December 1796. So the weather is picking up here behind me in Dunmore East, but we've got to imagine ourselves in similar conditions but in the French port of Brest back in 1796, where a huge French army, around 15,000 men under the command of a guy called Lazare Hoche, a really famous general at the time, were preparing to set sail for Ireland to launch an invasion and overthrow British rule. Now they had one problem: they needed to get out of the port of Brest, but there was an English squadron at Ushant just outside the port, so to try and dupe them, they pretended they were going to sail south for Portugal. So when they left Brest, they went down the French coast before cutting out into the Atlantic Ocean and then heading north for Ireland. Now along the way they did get separated, but nevertheless they did started to arrive off the Irish coast by December the 21st. Wolfe Tone, on board a ship called the Indomitable, caught his first glimpses of Ireland on the 21st, but sections of the fleet had been scattered, and unfortunately the French general Lazare Hoche didn't arrive in Ireland along with about 8 other ships. Nevertheless, there was still a major French army off the Irish coast on the 21st of December. They assembled at Mizen Head and then they opened their sealed orders. No one knew exactly where they were going, so they opened their sealed orders and they found the destination to be Bantry Bay, not far from Mizen Head. So they began to sail up the Irish coast on December the 21st, and unbelievably, even though the British had long known the French wanted to invade Ireland, no one was prepared at all. So next we might look at what was going on land. I'm standing here beside the seawall to try and get a bit of protection from what is a building storm now on the other side of that wall. I am beginning to wonder about the wisdom of recording outside on a day like today, but it does give you some sense of what the French were facing into as they crept their way up the west coast of Ireland towards Bantry Bay. But on shore, the British garrison in Ireland could not have been worse prepared. They had unbelievably identified Bantry Bay as a likely French invasion point. William Dalrymple, who was the commander of the British Army in Cork at the time, yes, he is related to or an ancestor of the famous historian William Dalrymple, but he had identified Bantry Bay as a likely point the French would invade. They also knew an invasion was in the offing, but they did assume they wouldn't attempt it in the depths of winter. Nevertheless, this French invasion fleet is making their way up to Bantry Bay. Now, Bantry Bay is 40 kilometres long and about 4 kilometres wide, so what they're going to do is sail right up to the end of that bay and land the army in West Cork. And from there, they've got an easy run straight into Cork City. There's very few troops in this part of the country, and in Cork City they would have command of a natural harbour, one of the biggest natural harbours anywhere in Europe, and this would be a great base of operations. Only drawback is that the centre of the revolutionary movement in Ireland is in Belfast at the other end of the island. But on the 22nd of December, as they're approaching Bantry Bay, everything looks good for the French. The British on shore are at 6s and 7s. Lord Carhampton, the commander of all British forces in Ireland, still doesn't even know that the French are actually about to invade. He is speculating that this invasion force might be something completely different. So if the French can land this army, it looks like the south of Ireland at least will fall. Now next, I'm going to answer the question of, did the French invasion fleet land and what happened? As you can see from my hood up, the weather is getting substantially worse. I'm really tempted to post a reel of bloopers at the end of this video, from my hat blowing off to the camera actually falling off the stand. But anyway, let's keep going. On the night of December 22nd, the French invasion fleet is starting to edge their way up Bantry Bay. Now, everything is going perfect, and on top of this, the prevailing winds in Ireland usually blow from the southwest, and that means that the invasion fleet will be pushed up Bantry Bay naturally. Unfortunately, at this point, when everything seems to be going perfectly, the British on shore are not ready for them. They have crossed over to Ireland without any major issue. Now, everything that can go wrong does go wrong. Unfortunately, the winds switch and don't blow from the southwest, but instead blow from the east. This has the effect of blowing the fleet out of Bantry Bay. Theobald Wolfe Tone on board one of the ships, the Indomitable, describes a situation where they're trying to get up the bay by degrees. It's absolutely torturous. He's on board, he can see the coast of Ireland, his own country, which he has been exiled from, but it seems really far away. And over the next couple of days, the fleet start to move their way up Bantry Bay, but they're not making much progress. And on top of this, the sailors on board the ships are not that experienced. The French had found it very hard to get an experienced crew for these ships because of the demand, given there was huge amounts of warfare going on all across Europe. And they're not really cut out for this very difficult task of getting the army up Bantry Bay. Now, by about the 24th of December, several of the ships have been blown back out to sea, and there is still, I should say, about 4,000 men on these ships, and they're still hopeful that they might be able to land that army. But increasingly on the ships, there's growing concern. The French commanders are worried that a British army is going to appear on the coast, and that will make landing this army very difficult. And at this point, Wolfe Tone comes up with a novel idea. He suggests they should leave Bantry Bay and sail up the coast to Limerick, because all armies in Ireland will be marching south to Ireland, and he will basically land this army behind these armies marching south. But unfortunately, the weather goes from bad to worse. It's unbelievable, the storms that blow in Bantry Bay day after day after day, and on board these ships, the situation is awful. They're getting tossed around in this narrow, long bay. They're looking at the shore, but they cannot land this army. And eventually, they begin to wonder, are they going to be able to land the army at all, as they lose ship after ship, which gets blown back out into the Atlantic. And eventually, towards the end of December, the French commanders decide they're going to cancel the entire mission. And the British occupation of Ireland at this point is basically saved by the weather. Wolfe Tone himself will make the famous kind of comment in his diary that Britain hadn't had a more narrow escape since the Spanish Armada of 1588, which was also kind of devastated by the British Navy, but also horrendous weather around the coast of Ireland and Scotland. And after this, the French army sets sail for France and arrives back in the port of Brest, kind of limps into the port on January the 1st and 2nd. Now to finish this video, I'm getting out of here because that sea behind me is getting more and more stormy. But to finish the video, I do want to talk about the aftermath of this attempted invasion in Ireland, because it has a lot of unintended consequences. Okay, I'm back in the relative calm of my car. That is pretty horrific weather out there. But to finish this video, I do want to talk about the aftermath of the Bantry Bay disaster, because it had a huge impact on Irish politics. The British very quickly realised how lucky they had been. Several politicians commented at the time, had that French army invaded, they definitely would have taken Cork, but on top of that, it would almost certainly have triggered a major rebellion in Ireland. And in that situation, with the rebellion breaking out across the island, and then a very experienced French army taking the south of the country, it was very likely that British rule in Ireland would have been severely threatened and maybe brought to an end. Now, that didn't happen, we know that. And in reaction to this, the British start a really repressive campaign against the revolutionary movement in Ireland. They begin this in Ulster, which is the heartland of the revolutionary movement, in an operation called the Disarming of the North, where they claim they're taking the weapons of the rebels, but basically they're intimidating the revolutionary movement. The violence inflicted on the wider population of Ulster during this Disarming of the North is absolutely brutal, and it has a huge impact on the revolutionary movement. Now, it doesn't bring it to an end, nor does it end French hopes of invading Ireland. And this will all lead up to the largest revolt in Irish history. That's the 1798 rebellion, which breaks out, unsurprisingly, in the summer of 1798. Now, that's all covered in a new podcast series that I've made, which I'll link beneath this video. I also have two other videos made on this kind of general period in Irish history. One is on how the American Revolution influenced Ireland at this time, and then the other is on the penal laws which subjugated the Catholic majority in Ireland in the 18th century. They're really good to get a better understanding of this time period. Now, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for other videos, I'd really love to hear them. And if you've got this far in the video and you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. It really helps grow the channel. It helps this video in the algorithm, and you'll also get lots of great Irish history content. I release a video every week. So look, I'll be talking to you again soon. Until then, slán.